You lift a grain sack and the seam beneath your arm splits. At first, it is only a finger-wide opening. Then you bend again. The thread pulls loose. Cold air reaches the shirt underneath and rain is already gathering over the fields. Across the market, a cloth seller unrolls clean wool. You turn your purse inside out. Even if there were coins in it, the roll on his counter is not a coat. It still has to be measured, cut, fitted, and sewn. One wrong cut can waste the part you need most. This does not mean every medieval villager owned one filthy outfit. The records are too incomplete for that. But they do show rural households with limited clothing, small amounts of cloth, and old garments that remain valuable after substantial wear. One late medieval English inventory lists an old red gown lined with fur and still values it at 60 pence. Old, but not worthless. So the question is not simply why villagers kept wearing damaged clothes, it is how many lives the same piece of textile could have before nothing useful remained. There are 4. First, the cloth has to be obtained. Then it has to survive being turned into a garment. After that, the garment has to survive the body. And when it leaves that body, the material may still not be finished. In 1404, officials entered the possessions of John Bethebrock, a tiler in southern England. The list gives him 1 gown and 2 yards of blue cloth. Together they were valued at 20 pence. The list was not a perfect photograph of everything he owned. John may have been wearing other clothes, and cheap items were easier to ignore than animals, tools, or better fabric. But the objects that were written down still reveal a problem you can see. 1 finished outer garment, 1 measured length of cloth, 1 decision waiting to be made. 2 yards was not a wardrobe. It might become part of a new garment, a smaller piece, a repair, or something saved for later. In several other recorded households, the cloth listed was enough for only 1 complete item, not 1 new item for every person in the house. 1 item from the entire quantity considered valuable enough to record. That changes the meaning of the merchant's counter. The household is not choosing between an old coat and a new coat. It may be choosing between repairing the old one now, saving the cloth for winter, making something for a growing child, or cutting it for the person whose work depends most on protection. The obvious solution is replacement. The real situation is triage, and the pressure does not disappear once cloth enters the house. The blue wool is spread across a table, and value becomes geometry. A sleeve must be wide enough to bend. A shoulder must allow lifting. A hem must survive mud and work. Cut 1 panel too short, and the missing length does not grow back. Narrow the sleeve too much, and the body discovers the mistake every time it moves. In the Essex poll tax of 1381, textile workers included weavers, fullers, dyers, tailors, and cloth sellers. Among household heads whose occupations were recorded, they were outnumbered only by people in agriculture and general labor. Not every village garment passed through all of those hands. Some work stayed inside the household. Other stages depended on specialists or markets. But the list exposes what the clean roll of wool conceals. Cloth was unfinished value moving through a chain of labor. The safest design might be plain, loose, and adjustable. It could leave room for movement, later alteration, and future repair. A tighter or more fashionable cut could consume more cloth and leave fewer useful remnants. So a garment's lifespan did not begin with the first stain. It began with the first cut. Then the body started collecting payment. A shoulder rubbed beneath a load. A hem dragged through wet ground. Knees met floors, fields, and workshop boards. The same elbows bent hundreds of times. Wear gathered where labor repeated itself. Now return to the split sleeve from the opening. If the tear is left alone, it travels. A small failure becomes a missing section. Repairing it early costs thread, a patch, and time. Ignoring it may cost the sleeve. This is why a repair did not need to make clothing look new. It needed to stop damage from moving. The records rarely show the person sewing by the fire. They show officials still assigning money to garments already described as old or worn. In 1399, John Horsley's worn gown was valued at 4 pence. That was a low value, but it still separated damaged property from rubbish. Another inventory from 1406 lists 5 old gowns of different colors together at 200 pence. The word old did not describe one economic condition. One worn garment might be barely worth preserving. Another might retain better cloth, color, lining, or construction. The red fur-lined gown from the opening was old too, yet it was valued at 60 pence. Old was not an ending. It was an argument over what remained. But repair carried a second cost that money cannot fully measure. It could preserve a household's resources while making shortage more visible. A patch could be practical, careful, and skilled. It could also tell other people that the original cloth had failed and replacement had not happened. Clothing protected the body, but it also entered roads, churches, markets, and workplaces before the wearer said a word. Two villagers could perform the same task while their clothing displayed different access to color, lining, fittings, and undamaged cloth. Rural communities were not economically uniform. Some people owned little. Others had better garments, more fabric, or accessories that changed how the whole outfit was read. So the third life of clothing was not merely survival through repair. It was the struggle to remain useful without losing control of what the garment revealed. Eventually, even the best repair stopped solving the problem. The sleeve became too weak, the body changed, the garment no longer fitted, or the owner finally acquired something better. That did not necessarily send the old piece into a fire or rubbish heap. In late medieval English markets, used clothing and furs were bought and sold. Craftsmen known as botchers repaired, altered, and reconstructed old garments. The cloth now left its first body. A long garment could be shortened. A worn surface could be turned inward. A damaged section could be removed. What no longer fitted one person might still serve another whose body, work, or expectations were different. This is the moment when the story becomes larger than poverty. A second-hand market exists only because different people see different futures inside the same object. To the first owner, the garment may be finished. To the seller, it is stock. To the botcher, it is usable material. To the next wearer, it may be the best clothing available. And when the garment could no longer remain clothing, the textile still faced one final question. Can any part of it become something else? Workers collected short ends of yarn left from weaving, known as thrums. These scraps could be used in rough fabrics, stuffing, or knitted caps. In April 1453, one ship brought 35 dozen thrum hats into Hull. 420 hats made from material that in another system might look like workshop waste. That does not mean medieval people wasted nothing. Cloth rotted, it burned, it disappeared. Not every garment passed neatly through every stage in this story, but the repeated instinct is visible. Do not ask whether the object still looks new. Ask whether the material can still perform another job. A tier begins at one elbow. Left open, it reaches the sleeve. When the sleeve fails, the body loses protection. When the garment fails, the household loses stored labor. When repairs accumulate, private shortage can become public appearance. When the first owner lets go, an entire market begins deciding what the cloth will become next. Today, a loose thread often feels like an annoyance. You pull it, cut it, or decide the garment is finished. For a household that could not replace cloth easily, the same loose thread was value beginning to escape. That is why medieval villagers had to make clothes last. A garment held more than fabric. It held labor, protection, choices, social appearance, and material that could remain useful after the original shape was gone. That logic was not primitive. It was rational under a real constraint. But rational did not mean comfortable. Every repair could preserve what the household owned while reminding the wearer what it could not yet replace. Return to the old red gown on the appraiser's table. The cloth is worn. The fur lining is old. Its first owner may no longer want it. The appraiser still writes down 60 pence. The gown was old. It was not finished. This is Medieval Stick Stories, where ordinary objects reveal how medieval life actually worked. Subscribe if you want the next hidden system brought back into view.